My name is Christy Tucker, and I'm 31 years old. If you ask anyone who's ever known me, they'll tell you the same thing. I'm steady. Maybe too steady. I'm the kind of person who remembers the little details in a conversation, who shows up when I say I will, who keeps the promises most people forget. For me, love was never about fireworks or chaos. It wasn't about shouting matches followed by desperate makeups or reckless passion that burns out in a week. To me, love was built brick by brick, small, steady things that made a foundation strong enough to survive anything. That's how I loved James. When we first met, he told me I was different. He had a history of toxic girlfriends, women, who thrived on drama. They'd yell storm out, block his number for a week, then return like nothing happened. He said he was tired of that cycle. You're my calm in the storm, he used, to whisper, his arms wrapped around me. With you, I feel grounded. I believed him, and I believed us. I worked hard. I came home. I listened when he vented about his job, about his boss who didn't appreciate him, about the projects that never seemed to end. When he mentioned something offhand, like how he missed the blueberry pie his grandmother used to bake, I filed it away. 2 months later, I surprised him with one on a random Thursday night. His smile back then could light up a room. That's the version of him I fell in love with. But people change. Or maybe people reveal who they were all along. At first it was subtle, a shift in tone I couldn't quite name. The way James smirked at his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. How he started rolling his eyes whenever I suggested a quiet night in, like I was some old woman clinging to her knitting needles. He began saying things like, I just want to feel alive again. At first I brushed it off as stress. Everyone gets restless. Everyone dreams of something more. But one weekend, while folding laundry in the next room, I overheard him on the phone with a friend. His voice was sharp, impatient. She's so predictable, he said. That word cut through me like glass. Predictable. That was me. The woman who never let him down, who showed up, who cared. Suddenly it wasn't enough. Still, I kept trying. That's what you do when you love someone. You fight to keep the pieces together, even if your hands start bleeding from holding the broken glass. Months earlier, James had mentioned something while scrolling on his phone. He saw pictures of a little mountain town, cabins with fireplaces, hiking trails, mist curling over pine trees. He said, "That looks peaceful. I'd love to get away like that someday." I never forgot. So when work finally gave me a breather, I made it happen. I booked a weekend trip, a cabin tucked away just 2 hours from the city. Private, quiet, beautiful. The kind of place where two people could remember why they loved each other. I didn't tell him right away. I wanted it to be a surprise. I pictured the moment so vividly, the way his eyes would widen, his smile would return, how he might pull me into his arms and say, "Christy, this is exactly what I needed." I set the table carefully that night, homemade pasta candles, a bottle of red wine. I wore the dress he once called his favorite, navy blue, with tiny buttons down the front. I even curled my hair, something I rarely bothered with after long days at the office. I sat across from him, trying to quiet the nerves bubbling in my chest. For once I felt hopeful again. This was going to remind him of us, of everything worth saving. He didn't notice the effort. His eyes kept flicking toward his phone screen, lighting up every few minutes. He tapped his nails on the table, humming distractedly to some tune only he could hear. Still, I smiled. I pushed the envelope with the cabin booking across the table and said softly, "I've got a surprise for you. Remember that mountain town you wanted to visit? I booked us a cabin this weekend. Just you and me. No work, no distractions." For a second, he stared at the tickets like he didn't understand what he was looking at. My heart thumped, waiting for that flicker of warmth I remembered. But instead he laughed. Not a warm, touched laugh. Not the kind that spills out when someone feels seen. It was sharp mocking. "A cabin in the middle of nowhere?" he scoffed. "Seriously, Christy." I blinked, caught off guard. "Yes. You mentioned it months ago. You said it looked peaceful, that you'd love to get away somewhere quiet. I thought this would be—" "God, Christy," he interrupted, pushing the envelope back toward me like it was an overdue bill. "You don't get it, do you? Peaceful isn't what I need. I need to feel alive." Alive. The way he said it made my stomach knot. My mind flashed back to that phone call I overheard, predictable. I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" His eyes glittered with a strange mix of impatience and superiority. Then he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His next words sliced through me. "My ex Marissa. She made me feel alive. You don't." It was like he had rehearsed it, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For a heartbeat, everything in me froze, the candles flickering, the hum of the refrigerator, even the air in my lungs. Marissa. The same woman who left him broken. The one he swore was manipulative, toxic, someone he'd never return to. He was using her as a measuring stick against me. The pasta on my plate blurred. My fork trembled in my hand, but I didn't let him see. He was watching me expecting tears. Maybe an argument. Maybe a desperate, "don't leave me." Instead, I stayed silent. Because somewhere deep inside me, something cracked. Not in a way that begged for him to fix it, but in a way that told me this moment was the beginning of the end. And I knew even before I said a word that nothing between us would ever be the same again. The silence that followed James's words felt heavier than the table between us. My ex Marissa made me feel alive. You don't. I thought I'd misheard. I wanted to, but the way his lips curled in smug certainty told me I hadn't. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out the hum of the fridge. The wine in my glass tasted like ash. Every sound in the room, the faint clink of silverware, the soft crackle of a candle, suddenly seemed too loud, too sharp, as if the world itself was mocking me. James leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like a professor waiting for a student to prove her worth. You don't understand, Christy. With Marissa there was fire. Chaos, yes, but excitement. You're safe. You're predictable. That word again. Predictable. I stared at him, my fork still poised above my untouched pasta. There was a time when I might have argued, when I would have listed every little thing I'd done to prove I cared. But now, watching his eyes glitter with cruel satisfaction, I realized he wasn't looking for proof. He was looking for a fight, a desperate pleading performance he could hold against me later. I refused to give him one. Instead, I placed my fork down carefully, the soft clink against the porcelain, sharper than any slap. You're comparing me to her, I said quietly. He shrugged. I'm just being honest. At least she knew how to keep me interested. A bitter laugh escaped my throat before I could stop it. Interested? She broke you, James. I remember nights you sat on my couch, crying because she disappeared without explanation, because she cheated on you, because she screamed in your face until you hated yourself. That's what you call alive. His jaw tightened, but his eyes gleamed with something I recognized too well. Defiance, pride. At least I felt something. With you, it's like I'm sleepwalking. For a moment, I just looked at him, trying to reconcile the man across from me with the one who once told me I was his anchor. How did we get here? How did love curdle into contempt so quietly, so completely? Finally, I exhaled. I see. 2 words. No shouting, no begging, just acknowledgement. James's brow furrowed. He hadn't expected that. That's it, you see? Yes, I said, lifting the wine glass to my lips. My hands were steady, even though my chest burned. I hear you. He scoffed. Wow, no wonder I feel the way I do. You're so passive. Any other woman would be fighting for me right now. I swallowed the wine, its bitterness coating my tongue, and set the glass down with deliberate calm. You want someone else's fire, I said softly. Then go find it. The words hovered in the air like smoke, thick and choking. For the first time that evening, his confidence faltered. His smug grin slipped, just for a heartbeat. Then, just as quickly, he tossed his head back and laughed again. Fine. Don't say I didn't warn you. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the tile. His phone buzzed, and he snatched it up eagerly typing as he walked out of the kitchen. He didn't even glance back at me. The candlelight flickered against his half-finished plate, the steam rising from the pasta dissipating into nothing. I sat there for a long time staring at the place where he'd been. My chest ached, but not in the way he wanted. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't fear of losing him. It was grief for the version of him I'd fallen in love with, the man who once cherished my steadiness instead of mocking it. And beneath that grief, buried deep, was something else, something stronger, something colder. Resolve. I didn't know it yet, but that moment the envelope pushed back across the table, his cruel laughter echoing in my ears, was the last straw. Later that night, he came back into the living room, scrolling through his phone, humming like nothing had happened. I didn't ask where he'd been or who he'd been texting. I just watched him from the corner of my eye, memorizing the way his face glowed under the blue light of the screen, how little space there was left for me in his world. And I thought, this is how endings begin. Quietly. Without explosions. Just a steady unraveling thread by thread until one day you wake up and realize you're holding nothing at all. I lay awake long after he fell asleep, listening to the shallow rhythm of his breathing. Every rise and fall of his chest sounded foreign, like lying beside a stranger. I turned toward the window, moonlight spilling across the floor, and whispered to myself a truth I hadn't dared to say aloud. He's already gone, and soon I will be too. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter like nothing had happened. The coffee pot gurgled, filling the room with its bitter aroma. James moved around in his robe mug in hand, scrolling through his phone as if last night's words hadn't gutted our relationship. "Morning," he said casually, not even looking up. I studied him. The same man who once told me I made him feel safe now couldn't even meet my eyes. He was whistling, tapping his finger against the ceramic, humming along to some half-forgotten tune. For him, life had returned to normal. For me, everything had changed. I pulled my own mug closer, the warmth pressing into my palms like an anchor. "James," I said finally, my voice even, "we need to talk." He sighed dramatically, setting his cup down with a clatter. Oh God, the serious voice. What now? I met his gaze steady. "Last night. What you said. Do you even want to be here anymore?" For a second, amusement flickered in his eyes, like I'd just asked whether he wanted eggs or toast. "I mean, I like you, Christy. You're good for me. You're stable. The kind of woman anyone would be lucky to have." "But not you," I said. He smirked a cruel twist of lips. "Not enough for me. No." He leaned back in his chair, gesturing vaguely with his mug. "You don't give me that spark, that intensity. I felt it with Marissa. I felt it with others. With you, it's like settling into boring before I've even had my fun." My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "So you've already made your choice." He tilted his head, mock sympathy dripping from his tone. "Don't be like that. It's not your fault you don't know how to keep things exciting." I let the words hang, let them poison the air between us. Then I pushed my chair back slowly, the scrape against the floor echoing like thunder in the silence. "No," I said, "it's not my fault, but it's not my problem anymore either." He blinked, thrown off balance. "That's it. You're just giving up." "No," I corrected, standing. "You gave up. I'm just accepting it." For a moment, the smugness faltered. His mouth opened like he wanted to lash out, but no words came. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry or beg. I just walked to the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and began to fold my life into it, clothes, photographs, the small pieces of myself scattered across his space. By the end of the week, I was gone. I didn't announce it. I didn't post a dramatic status online. I simply disappeared from his life like a ghost slipping through the cracks. Moving into my new apartment felt surreal. One week I was making dinner in our kitchen. The next, I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes, staring at bare walls, and wondering who I was without him. The silence was deafening at first. Night stretched on, long and heavy, with no familiar voice filling the space. Loneliness crept into bed beside me like an unwelcome guest. But beneath it all, there was something else, a fragile, flickering relief. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for a phone to light up with someone else's name. I wasn't listening for the sigh of annoyance when I suggested something simple. I was just me. And in that silence, I started to breathe again. It didn't take long for whispers to find me. Friends trying to soften the blow hesitated before telling me, but I could hear the guilt in their voices the way they tiptoed around the truth. "James is seeing Marissa again." Of course he was. The same Marissa who once left him shattered. The woman he had sworn was toxic, manipulative, dangerous. The one he thanked me for saving him from. Now she was his spark, his fire, his chaos. I didn't cry when I heard. I didn't even flinch. I just nodded lips, pressed into a thin line, and poured myself another cup of coffee. Inside, I thought, good. Let him have what he thinks he wants. Let him learn that storms don't keep you alive. They just leave you in ruins. I didn't know it then, but karma was already waiting in the wings. The first month alone was the hardest. I'd wake up expecting to hear James humming in the kitchen or see his shoes by the door. Instead, silence greeted me every morning, vast and unfamiliar. It pressed on my chest until I thought I'd suffocate. But silence, I discovered, could also be a teacher. At first, I filled it with distractions. Extra hours at work, mindless scrolling background TV shows I didn't even watch. But gradually, the silence shifted from suffocating to soothing. It became a space where I could hear myself again. I started going to the gym not obsessively, but with purpose. With each drop of sweat, I felt layers of bitterness peeling away. I focused on my career, pouring myself into projects until I earned a promotion I hadn't even been chasing. And one Saturday, I walked past a shop window filled with cameras and remembered something I'd once said to James in passing. I've always wanted to try photography. He had laughed back then, dismissing it as a boring hobby. So I bought a secondhand camera. The first time I lifted it to my eye and captured the way morning light curved through the blinds of my apartment, something inside me sparked my own spark, not borrowed from anyone else. While I was learning to frame beauty again, whispers about James, And Marissa drifted to me through mutual friends. I never asked, but news has a way of finding you when you least want it. At first, they were inseparable, posting glossy pictures of rooftop bars and late-night concerts clinging to each other like they'd invented passion itself. People told me carefully watching my face for cracks, but I only nodded. Because I knew. I knew how storms worked. They dazzled at first electric and wild until the lightning burned everything in its path. It didn't take long. I heard the stories secondhand. James and Marissa fighting in public voices raised sharp enough to cut through glass. Jealousy boiling over when she accused him of texting someone else. Nights when he disappeared, leaving her frantic, then reappeared as if nothing had happened. One friend described seeing Marissa storm out of a restaurant and tears streaking her mascara while James stayed behind, finishing his drink unbothered. I listened and sipping my coffee, keeping my face unreadable. Inside, a strange calm settled over me. This was the chaos he'd chosen over me. This was the fire he thought would keep him alive. I didn't rejoice in his pain. Not exactly. But there was a deep, unshakable validation in knowing I hadn't been the problem. I was predictable because I was steady. I was boring because I didn't destroy the people I loved. And slowly I began to realize those weren't flaws. They were strengths. The distance between us grew wider with each passing month. I didn't see him, didn't hear from him. His name became a rumor, a story carried by others, no longer part of my present. And in that space I began to grow. One evening, standing on my balcony with my camera slung around my neck, I watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and violet. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about James, or what I lacked, or who I wasn't. I was just me, Christy Tucker, 31, alone but not lonely. What I didn't know was that while I was building a new life, James's was quietly crumbling, and sooner than I expected, the past would come knocking again. It started with a text. "Hey, just wanted to see how you're doing." James's name lighting up my screen stopped me mid-step. I hadn't seen it in months. My thumb hovered, but I didn't answer, not out of malice, but because there was nothing left to say. A week later came another. "I was thinking about you today. Remember that cabin trip you wanted to take? I should have gone. I realize that now." I stared at the message until the words blurred, then turned the phone face down on the table. Silence was my reply. But silence only made him louder. The calls began. At first I let them go to voicemail. Then came one where his voice cracked. "Christy, please. I know I messed up. She wasn't who I thought she was. You always made me feel safe, and I threw it away. Can we just talk?" My chest tightened, hearing his desperation, but I didn't call back, because I remembered. I remembered the way he had once looked at me across a candlelit table, mocking my love as predictable, dismissing my heart as bland. And no apology could erase that. Then one evening, as I was leaving work, I saw him leaning against my car in the fading light. His hands shoved deep into his pockets, his hair unkempt, eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Christy," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can we talk just 5 minutes?" I froze, keys clenched tight in my hand. "Why?" "Because I made a mistake." His words tumbled out quickly, desperate. "I thought I wanted excitement, passion, everything Marissa promised. But it was fake. She used me. You were the only real thing I had, and I was too blind to see it." I stood in the cool evening air, watching him unravel. Months ago, I would have melted. I would have rushed into his arms, convinced love meant forgiving the unforgivable. But the woman who stood there now wasn't the same one who had begged him silently to choose her. I tilted my head, studying him. "Don't you miss us?" he asked softly. Panic flickering in his gaze when I didn't answer right away. "We had something good. You always cared. You always made me feel secure. I didn't know how to appreciate it back then." A bitter laugh escaped me. "No, James, I don't miss us." His face fell crumpling like paper. "You don't mean that." "I do." My voice was calm, steady. "I gave you everything once. You told me it wasn't enough. And you were right. It wasn't enough. Not for you. But it will be for someone else." Anger bled into his desperation. "So that's it. You're just going to throw me away after everything I meant to you." I leveled my gaze at him. "You threw me away first, remember." His mouth opened, then closed. For a moment, he looked like a man realizing he was drowning, but the lifeboat had already sailed. I stepped around him, sliding into my car. My hands shook slightly, but not from doubt, from release. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, shoulders slumped, swallowed by the twilight. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No ache, no longing, just freedom. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The ache of James's absence became less of a wound and more of a faint scar, something I carried but no longer felt. By then, my life was no longer a shadow of what I'd lost. It was something new, something mine. My photography had grown from a hobby into a passion. Weekends were filled with wandering city streets capturing fleeting moments, an old man feeding pigeons, a child tugging her mother's hand, sunsets bleeding into night. And somewhere along the way I met someone new. His name was Daniel. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't reckless, and he didn't need chaos to feel alive. He laughed at my dry jokes, asked about my day like he meant it, and when I showed him my photographs, he looked at them like they mattered. It wasn't fireworks. It was steady, warm light, the kind that didn't blind you but guided you home. One night we were invited to a mutual friend's party. I hesitated before agreeing. I knew there was a chance James would be there, but something inside me whispered that I wasn't the same woman who once trembled under his words. So I went. The apartment buzzed with conversation music spilling from a speaker in the corner. Daniel's hand was warm in mine as we moved through the crowd. And then I saw him. James. He stood alone near the drinks table, older somehow, though only months had passed. His hair was a little longer. His shirt wrinkled, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of his choices finally pressed too hard. He scanned the room until his gaze landed on me. Our eyes met. For a moment, silence swallowed everything else. The laughter, the music, the chatter, they all blurred into nothing. It was just him and me, staring across a gulf that used to be filled with love. He lifted a hand in a faint, awkward wave, a ghost of recognition. A plea, maybe. I didn't wave back. I didn't smile. I simply nodded a polite acknowledgement of someone I once knew. Then I turned Daniel's laughter drawing me back, his hand squeezing mine. And in that instant, I knew the truth. James wasn't my storm anymore. He wasn't my anchor, my mirror, my burden. He was just a chapter closed, a name filed away in the past. I leaned closer to Daniel, listening to the ease in his voice, the steadiness of his presence. The contrast was so stark, it was almost dizzying. As the night wore on, I caught James glancing at me once or twice, but he never approached. Maybe he knew it was too late. Maybe he finally saw what he'd thrown away. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I just felt free. On the walk home, the city lights glittered around us, and Daniel's arm brushed against mine. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who curled her hair, lit candles, and hoped a surprise cabin trip would keep love alive. The one who swallowed insults and silences because she believed in holding on. She was gone. And in her place was me, Christy Tucker, steady but not predictable, resilient but not unfeeling, finally alive in my own way. Because I had learned something James never did. Passion isn't chaos. Love isn't fire that consumes. Sometimes it's the quiet strength that carries you forward even